It was also discovered that there is a very strict stereochemical requirement in the E2 reaction. To understand this requirement, what we are going to need to do is look at how the groups are aligned with each other when the molecule reacts. And it's going to be easiest to see this if we draw a Newman projection, which shows how groups and bonds align along a given bond. So what we're interested in is the alpha carbon, which has a leaving group, and the alignment of the leaving group with the hydrogen that would be removed from the beta carbon. And what we discovered was that there is a required alignment. The leaving group and the hydrogen need to be arranged anti to each other, which means on opposite sides of the Newman projection, and in roughly the same plane. So it turns out that what organic chemists did is, instead of using the term anti-coplanar, because coplanar really implies that they are literally 180 degrees apart, perfectly in the same plane, they came up with a term, anti-periplanar. Periplanar means in a similar plane, close to planar. So you can have a slight deviation. You could have, for example, instead of 180 degrees, you could have 178 degrees, and the reaction would work. Although the requirement is fairly strict, and you're only allowed just 2 to 3 degrees of flexibility. So what we want is this 180 degree, almost 180 degree alignment from the beta hydrogen to the alpha leaving group. If we get this, then this is going to place the remainder of the groups on the alpha carbon and the beta carbon in a particular alignment. In other words, if we look at group A, which is on the carbon back in the Newman projection, which is our alpha carbon because it has a leaving group attached, we can see that group A is aligned on the same side of the anti-periplanar plane as group B on the front carbon, which would be the beta carbon. Similarly, C is aligned with D on the same side of this plane. If we then do our elimination reaction, what's going to happen is we're going to remove the beta hydrogen. This bond then will disappear. Because this bond is gone then, it's not available to push these other two bonds, the bond from beta to B and beta to D, it's not available to push them down by electron repulsion per VSEPR. So these bonds flatten upward. They're not being pushed anymore. So they look something like this now. Similarly, in the back, we form the double bond and the leaving group is pushed out. So again, that pair of electrons attached to the leaving group will not be available to force A and C away from it in a VSEPR arrangement. So these will flatten downward into a planar arrangement. We end up with something that when we look from the end, it looks kind of like this. They're sort of all kind of flat in the plane. Now, the double bond then is essentially a line connecting this carbon to the hidden carbon behind it, and it runs directly through the center of this structure. Okay, so we would call this the bond axis. If we look then, A and B started out on the same side of the anti-periplanar plane, and they end up on the same side as the bond axis. Similarly, C and D started on the same side of the anti-periplanar plane, and they end up on the same side of the bond axis. Now, if we redraw this then, looking at it from a top view, we get this. Here's the double bond. This was the beta carbon. This was the alpha carbon. And we can see that A from the alpha carbon and B from the beta carbon are now on the same side of the bond axis. They're cis to each other. And similarly, C and D are on the same side of the bond axis. The important thing to note then is that there is a stereoisomer of this, where we, in theory, would have rotated 180 degrees around the double bond. So something like this, I rotated the left carbon. In that case, A would rotate up to where C was, C would rotate down to where A was, right? And this would have the same connectivity, but it would be a stereoisomer. A is now aligned with D instead of being aligned with B. C is aligned with B. This second stereoisomer is not formed in most cases where the reactant can freely rotate. So this tells us that this alignment must be required for the reaction. Okay, let's do an example then with an actual reactant. So this is an actual reactant. It's drawn in a perspective orientation with wedges and dashes. We imagine our eye is right here, looking down the bond. And I've already put the hydrogen on the beta and the leaving group from the alpha in the plane of the paper, so they're effectively anti-periplanar. So if we look in this direction then, we would see that beta carbon is in front, here's the hydrogen attached to beta, and then ethyl would be on the left, methyl would be on the right. If we then look at the back carbon, hydrogen would be on the left, methyl would be on the right, and bromine would be straight up and down in the anti-periplanar plane. If we then imagine doing the E2 elimination using these conditions, we would remove this hydrogen, pair of electrons would force its way down in between the two carbons depicted at the center of the Newman projection. You would push out the bromine, these groups would all flatten, and looking at it from one side, we would have ethyl and hydrogen aligned on one side of the bond axis and methyl aligned on the other side of the bond axis. So this would be the only product that we should expect to be formed. This one, which is the stereoisomer of this. In fact, this one is cis. This would be the trans. That one is not formed. So we call this a stereoselective reaction. A stereoselective reaction is a reaction where we have more than one possible stereoisomer of our product. So that example, in this one we had the cis and the trans both possible. However, only one or only a few of all the possible ones are preferred. In this case, it's only this one is preferred or selected from among all the possibilities. So stereoselective, selecting one stereoisomer out of the possibilities. Now, the stereochemistry requirement then can interfere with some of our other rules and results. Here's an example. So if we were to do an E2 reaction on this substrate, so this is a cyclohexane, it has a methyl group and a bromine, they are trans to each other. The alpha carbon is right here, and then we have a beta 1, which is the beta that has the methyl group attached, and a beta 2, which is the methyl on the carbon on the other side of where the methyl group is attached. We have two possible products. We could go from alpha to beta 1 and make our double bond there, or we could go from alpha to beta 2 and make our double bond there. And we would see that these are regioisomers, right? They're constitutional isomers of the products. And in fact, based on our previous discussion, we would expect that the most substituted double bond would be preferred. So if we look at this molecule, you can see here are the two carbons of the double bond. There's a methyl group, the CH2 of the ring, down here another CH2 of the ring, and then a hydrogen. So this we would call tri-substituted. 3 carbon groups directly attached to the double bond carbons. In contrast, if we look at this one, we have the CH3 here of the ring and a hydrogen, and then a CH2 and a hydrogen. So there's only 2 carbon groups here. This is only di-substituted. So Zaitsev rule would say this should be the preferred product. This is what we would expect. However, when we actually do the reaction, it turns out that in the laboratory, this one, the Hoffman product or the non-Zaitsev product, is the actual preferred product in this case. This was unexpected. Why did this happen? Well, it turns out that this is a stereochemistry issue. When we look at the chair has relatively restricted rotations because of the ring. And furthermore, it turns out that if we look at a chair, the only groups that can become anti-periplanar in a chair are groups that are in axial positions. So for example, the bromine here is axial. We come down, we go to the beta, we go down again. That is a 180-degree angle, and that is anti-periplanar. And the group down here is in the axial position, as is the bromine. In contrast, if we look at the beta-1 side, the beta-1 side has 1 hydrogen and 1 methyl group, but the methyl group is on a dash, so it's on a lower bond when compared to the bromine, which was on a wedge or on an upper bond. So that puts it on this axial bond right here. Then the hydrogen would have to be equatorial. Well, it turns out that from axial bromine to equatorial hydrogen, there's only a 60-degree angle. And so those are not anti-periplanar. If we try to flip the chair so that, remember that flipping a chair moves axials to equatorials and it moves equatorials to axials. What we see is that the bromine is flipped into an equatorial position. If we look at our angles, we come down, we go to the beta. The thing that is anti-coplanar to that is this carbon group of the ring. These 2 hydrogens are both gauche to the bromine. And similarly, this hydrogen and that methyl group are gauche to the bromine. So it will not even react in this conformation. Going back to this conformation then, when we look, we initially go and look at the beta-1 hydrogen because that's on the more substituted side, but we can see that can't be anti-coplanar. It will not react. So therefore we go to the other side. Now beta-2 has 2 hydrogens, so one of them will have to be axial, and therefore it will be anti-coplanar. So this is the hydrogen that will react, the beta-2 hydrogen. Base will remove it, pair of electrons will come here, push out the bromine. So to summarize, substituents can only be anti-periplanar when they are both axial. The beta-1 hydrogen is equatorial when the bromine is axial, so not anti-periplanar, won't react. Only one of the 2 beta-2 hydrogens is anti-periplanar when the bromine is axial, so a beta-2 hydrogen will react and the double bond will be formed alpha to beta-2, like this. So you can see that this is a direct consequence of that stereochemical requirement, and in fact is really strong supporting evidence that that requirement exists.